tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never ever jam today. You're lagging. With you. I hate you because you said I'm lagging. No, I'm not. That's not true. I don't believe you. Oh, I am live. That's awesome. Well, I can't see. So it's fine. Yeah. So everyone thinks I'm talking to myself, which is extra awesome. Because I am. Yeah, that is true. Hold on, everyone. My fucking the stream's not loading on my phone, so I can't see your comments if you have. Because somebody. Because oh wait, I know why it's not. Wait, hold on. It's not loading. I'm stupid. Yeah. Okay, there we go. I fixed it. But we don't want to hear ourselves. That's like bad. All right. I'm sorry for the delay. Um, just so hopefully whoever was here last time can be here again. Well, what do we go over last time? Well, uh, we're talking about methadone. We're talking about methadone. Not just methadone, but we're going to be mainly talking about methadone. This is what's this woman, Emily Gomart, is going to is in this like little paper talking about a substitution clinic in France. The blue clinic is what she calls it. Um, and she talks about how there's a very specific model of addiction, especially in France, but there's also one that I think is more general. The addict is somebody who is controlled by the drug. In France, this took the form of specialists who thought that addicts um, a failure to stop using drugs made them unfree individuals. That they it's not just that they weren't functioning properly, that they like literally lacked freedom. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, and how the methods they use, abstinence. They didn't think of continuing treatment um, unless the person addicted to the drug uh, was already off the drug. And since this is a substitution clinic, this will mainly be with like opiates and other stuff like that. Um, I have to assume, and and so yeah, and so uh, this was like the specialist practice was like an utter fucking failure. They didn't even actually give these patients psychiatric care. This was also denied to them, like psychiatric medication of any kind if they needed it. There was failure on multiple levels, and then in comes the what's it called? The substitution people. Also, hold on, I need to check something. Okay, I don't like this. Why can't I hear myself? I don't want to. I'm gonna like fry. Okay, I'm literally going to cry. Okay, I basically fixed it. Sorry, it was like making me like freak the fuck out while I was like hearing my voice. Okay, yeah, but I had the sound off, but it doesn't want to go all the way down because it hates me, and it's somehow all someone else's fault. Um, uh, yeah, but yeah, and I think that basically covers it. And without further ado, we'll get started. Are you even on the right page, Estelle? Yeah, you are not on the right page. It's on page 92. It's on the next page. Good. Or, okay. Actually, it was on the next page. All right. And before we get into this, one more thing. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Please feel free to give your comments, your questions, your concerns. I will answer them as adequately as I can. And yeah. The first condition of a good treatment, then, according to the substitution promoters, was that it should hold itself responsible for the qualities emergent in the entities passing through it. Substitution promoters inverted the psychological interpretation of addicts' failure in treatment. Users did not fail because they disliked to pass through the other. Users relapsed because the specialist had failed to pass through the user. Substitution promoters suggested that instead of aiming to get users to pass through them, caregivers had to learn to pass the users. Methadone was what allowed the user to be included in treatment. It became a technique for acting with the patient. Substitution is finding a mode of control that they will accept themselves. Before I thought that I could do it without the drug, opiate substitute. I was wrong. AC interview, 1996. AC is obviously, as you can tell, a substitution promoter. And something interesting about a lot of the substitution promoters in France is they were originally specialists. And it is because of their firsthand experience with the failure of the specialist way of treating, these drug users that actually ended up the substitution um, gaining some sort of traction is like the really that's the really important thing. This wasn't just like a ragtag team in opposition doing some random bullshit. These were actually the people who were who maybe a couple of years ago, maybe even just a year ago, might have been included in the group that's in the group of specialists being criticized. Um, the and it's I I think very obviously because they don't just treat it as a failure of the patient, they treat it as their own failure. They failed the patient. The patient failed to adhere to treatment. Um, the treater failed to provide adequate treatment, and yeah, um, yeah. Thus, methadone, an addictive substance, becomes the element which, when added to a treatment setup, allows the experimenters to include the phenomenon. The contrast with previous definitions of the drug should be insisted upon. For specialists, narcotic drugs, including methadone, impacted upon the biological substrate of the individual, which in turn simply reacted to the substance. This occurred without at any point mobilizing the higher functions of the user. The drug acted without the user. Among substitution promoters, it was argued that using methadone guaranteed that treatment would include the user. If anything, the specialist had acted without the users. Um, this is. Are you telling me that medical professionals have to bother to approach the patient and learn about them? Precaution, yeah. Um, but this is actually really important for Gomar's work. What she's going to be talking about, very specifically, um, uh, um, there's a term in Factish Gods. It's called the fair fare. Um, uh, 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 the fair in English is the to do, but fair in English would be uh, to make do, or make actually isn't the right word because it implies something that actually isn't what is meant, but that's how it's translated in Factish Gods. It's 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 more so to help in action. Basically, it's a helping do. It's a yeah. It's a making make. I guess if that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Make doesn't make sense in English, but making make um kind of makes a bit more sense and gets it across because it's it's it it's allowing something to happen that previously without this thing um, wasn't possible, but also that isn't simply the total source of the action. That the thing being aided is also just as important to the equation. If that makes any sense. It's kind of hard to explain, but yeah. The substitution promoters thus took high rates of failure to be an occasion to learn about the quality of their own setup. Remember, many methadone promoters had previously been specialists. Instead of taking failure as the product of the shortcomings of those who failed, instead of insisting that users should just try harder, they took failure to constitute an inheritance worthy to share. This is a crucial methodological shift in the treatment of addiction. They accepted failure as an inheritance when they accepted to tentatively modify their relation to the phenomenon. Yeah, and um, I've had okay. A specialist is the uh are the main people in France before the substitution promoters came along that treated patients for addiction. The specialists largely dealt, as I said, in abstinence treatment. They would provide treatment to the patient, provided they were not on the drug, provided they had stopped the drug. I assume for a specified length of time, um, which which is really important as a thing as Gomart talks about it, because it literally excludes people struggling with addiction. Because if you're an addict, especially if you're an addict addicted to narcotics, you can't just stop. Uh, you might die. You might literally just die. Um, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to this, but yeah. Oh, well, what I was going to say. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Um, I've talked to a lot of therapists. I've talked to a lot of psychiatrists, and um, kind of, well, like she's talking about, which I think feels pretty obvious to a lot of people, but it's not so obvious to some people. The best doctors I've had have treated things this way. When something has failed, a lot of the doctors I had would treat it as a failure with me. I was the one who failed. Uh, you know, it wasn't their fault. Well, they didn't do anything. Uh, they weren't. Uh, they didn't need to adjust. It was me who needed to adjust. And the best doctors and therapists I had uh, were the ones uh, who just haven't treated things that way, which feels pretty obvious, but sometimes it's not. The problem was, they continued, that the specialists had set up a bad experiment. They had created a situation in which, no matter what the user's response to treatment, she/he could only confirm their initial hypothesis about addicts, that they are empty carcasses. To use philosophical terms, users had little chance of expressing themselves in terms which had not been already set out by the experimenters. Inversely, substitution promoters attempted to orient their action in relation to the object of study's own determinations, and the chemically constrained interaction between staff and user is seen as the occasion for the revelation construction of these determinations. With methadone, the conditions of treatment are transformed in such a way that the phenomenon is no longer determined by the analyst's initial interpretation. The substitution promoters attempted to set up conditions in which the drug user might resist and impose his own constraints upon the caregiver. It becomes possible to understand the resistance the Blue Clinic is aiming for when one holds the definitions of the ant sociology of technology regarding the resistance of objects. In this other field, the term refers to 1. The emergent quality of all properties of humans and things, being red, flexible, hot, are all resistances. And 2. Particular emergent quality among all these resistances, that entities not simply obey the designer's plans, but also transform and deform them in unexpected ways. The Blue Clinic seeks to constrain users in such a way that they act in turn, prolong and deviate the actions exercised upon them. It is striking that for substitution promoters, what makes the user capable of resistance is methadone, the strongest possible constraint, an addictive chemical, a substance reputed to be determining, enslaving, and to preclude any form of resistance. Because this is important. At this time in France, this would have been before the 1990s. In France, the Blue Clinic was set up during the 90s, I think, when substitution treatment was gaining stuff. It might have been set up before a little bit, though. Um, 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 uh, the addiction specialist, so that no one gets confused about what I mean by specialist. The addiction specialist didn't want to do substitution treatment. They didn't even want to give the patient any psychiatric medications. They were adverse to any of these things. Um, and it's really important. It's another thing that's really important is um, the different timescales. Um, uh, with substitution treatment, that's good. That's really good. Uh, it's really good because The specialists, the addiction specialists in France, when asked how long it would take for the addict to stop being an addict, their answer was like 20 years. Um, while with the substitution treatments, the time is by no means short, but I think the Blue Clinic estimates like around six years, somewhere around 6 years, for substitution treatment for you to basically almost entirely, and things might have changed. This was like done in the late 90s. The work that she's talking about and that she's basing this stuff on, this is all done in the late 90s. So yeah. I assume, and also there's a whole bunch of um, and so yeah, it's also just there's also uh, obviously a lot of other values to substitution, mainly just because um, the if you're doing substitution treatment, you're not getting like drugs that could be contaminated with other stuff, where the needles could be potentially contaminated because you're doing it in a clinic. Um, you're obviously going to reduce the risk of overdose um, uh, by like quite a bit. And stuff like that. And so I don't know. There's a lot of things that are just good about substitution treatment in general. Yeah, yeah. That's really scary. That's really fucking scary, especially because the uh, I'll stop for Shimano so I don't get too caught up with this. The prognosis given to these people, that's kind of that actually makes a lot of sense. But that's also really sad because the prognosis given um, by this article in like the late 90s is a really happy one. Substitution treatment seems to be really effective at what it does. Um, um, and like even in the early stages of this stuff, they had they're talking about methadone mainly in this paper, but it isn't just methadone that the substitution treatments used. They actually later on talk about how um, the different substances that are used for different circumstances, um, uh, and stuff like that, and it's very interesting. Um, and yeah, that's really sad and also really scary. My uh one of my uncles died from a fentanyl overdose. Um, and, and it was really sad. That's awesome. Though I think that also makes sense. The division between the specialists and the substitution promoters can be grasped in the contrast between their respective interpretations of the maturing out theory, a popular explanation of addiction. According to this theory, drug use is a transitory state, a career with different stages. After 10 to 20 years, the user will naturally exit from this period of drug use. Thank you. You rest well. This implies that he/she does not need help, just time to quit drugs. He/she will eventually will. For the specialist, their task is therefore to stand by and to remain, to remind the user that he is a free man, and that she/he is making a free choice when she/he uses drugs. Prescribing substitution perpetuates addiction and thus is only an obstacle to the natural evolution of the user. The specialist should modestly wait for the moment when the user arrives of his own accord and an authentic desire to stop. Constraints would only deform, corrupt the desire of the patient without increasing the efficacy of treatment. If medication, an opiate, or any psychotropic drug was given by specialists before 1995, it was ashamedly and under the table. But yeah, see this 10 to 20 years. I think she's about to give. Um, I think she's about to give. No, not yet, but she will. She will. She might have already, and it might not come up again. But yeah, I think it'll come out soon. Like the drastic difference in how long these timelines are, and also what these timelines actually offer. Because 10 to 20 years of not receiving help of any time, a kind, risking, she's going to talk about all this, risking getting HIV, getting other bloodborne pathogens and stuff like that, risking overdose potentially, um, um, risking losing your job. That's another important thing. Um, the use of substitution treatments like this are obviously going to help people not lose their job. The helping the people do this and stuff like that, and yeah. For substitution promoters to assume that the user is free to make choices is evidence of a gross ignorance by the present conditions of life of the drug user. For them, awaiting the user's authentic request for help is tantamount to non assistance to a person in danger. The maturing out theory demands, according to them, that the caregiver offer care even to users who are unable or unwilling to interrupt their drug use. The substitution promoter should offer forms of medical and social assistance which might prevent the user from becoming HIV positive or socially marginalized. If such interventions are not made, the user will be dead upon arrival. Substitution keeps the user alive and healthy till C/C is ready to exit from drug use. Further, for these actors, the maturing out theory implies that the exit from addiction is progressive and the user slowly regains control of his drug use and of himself. Caregivers must teach users how to use addictive drugs with less tragedy. In their view, constraint may be beneficial in the course of this long apprenticeship of the user. The critique of the specialist then pivots upon one central point. To say that drug users are free subjects and should be left alone might have been useful in the context of the 1970s, but it is lethal in France today, given the conditions of life of drug users. Saying the user is constrained biochemically by the drug and seeking to intervene, constrain him/her in turn, actually opens up new possibilities. Um, this is also something really important. Um, um, this is also really important. Part of the reason in France that Gomart actually attributes the specialist way of doing things is because the specialist specifically didn't think that patients were psychologically ill. They didn't have uh, they weren't people. They didn't want drug addicts to end up in psychiatric institutions, basically, and that's kind of the reason that she puts on this. How much of that is true, I obviously don't know. I don't know the history of of addiction treatment in France, but I think that makes a lot of sense to me. But that's just again, I don't know, and she provides that as a tentative reason for why the specialists came up with this method. Um, is all. In this debate, it became possible to hold that constraints, not just intersubjective but also chemical, might become resources for care, building blocks in the construction of the subject. In contrast, the specialists had based their total rejection of constraints upon sociological analyses of medicalization, the works of anti-psychiatrist Thomas Saz, and upon a certain reading of Foucault, according to which the individual agent is oppressed by structural determinations. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Which is uh the thing they were probably concerned about at the time was them being lumped in with uh, all drug users being lumped in with that. For instance, I assume one of the main things would have been stuff like schizophrenia and bipolar. I know in America, uh, those were some of the two things that landed you in institutions. I don't know the history of institutionalization in France, but I assume there was a similar thing there where they didn't patients probably did have mental illness, but it wasn't like um you need to be institutionalized for like the rest of your life. Which would have been the case since I think this stuff occurred in like the 70s, and psychiatry has gone a long way. Um, so especially laws relating to psychiatry. That's another important thing. Not just psychiatry itself, but the laws pertaining to it. Um, Medical and penitentiary institutions, procedures of regulation, addiction to prescribed drug, etc., further risks further reducing the agent's freedom. E.C. comments that the specialist version of Foucault today excludes possibilities. In particular, it makes possible the articulation between the judiciary and treatments of addiction that has become necessary as the addicts have become more marginalized. Society, according to Mark Valler, a key author among specialists, is Big Brother. It refers to Foucault. But this representation of society has recently reinforced the power of cops by making any dialogue between cops and shrinks impossible. The power of cops has increased. Substitution promoters thus make a theoretical point about the possibility that users might benefit from the action of constraints. In the sense in which we use it, control has two faces. The first one is of repression and punishment, the other of cohesion and cooperation. At the end of an apprenticeship of drug users at the Blue Clinic, which would no doubt be rather long, we have to navigate between constraint, initiation, education, information, and seduction. This theoretical point is reminiscent of a different reading of Foucault, one that emphasizes passages in his work like the following: the productivity of constraints. We must cease always describing the effects of power in negative terms. It excludes, it represses, it buries, it censors, it abstracts, it masks, it hides. In fact, power produces. It produces the real, it produces domains of objects and rituals of truth. The individual and our knowledge of this individual come from this production. Constraints produce. For specialists, external forces, whether a drug or a therapist forcing the user to accept care, can only reduce. In contrast, substitution promoters constructed revealed constraints as more performative of the subjects than the ideal of freedom. Thus, a specialist assumed that what it takes for a subject to act is autonomy. My colleagues at the Blue Clinic propose that it is influence, seduction, multiple constraints that allow humans to act. Not only do they propose that constraints are beneficial, they also pursue their experimentation by asking about the kind of constraints, that actually are productive. And um, this is really important. Um, this is really important. I think this is getting to, I think, um, a lot of things. Uh, Anti-psychiatric medication people will often talk about how, well, you're a forever patient to these systems, man. You're a forever patient to them, and that's not really the case. If you think about it for a second, um, sure, you might have to be on this medication for, if not the rest of your life, depending on what issues you have, a very long time. But uh, there's actually a key thing in this. That's not a bad thing. If the medication works, um, uh, if the medication works, if it helps you, if it reduces whatever symptoms you are experiencing, um, you will also be able to do more than you might have been able to do off of the medication, not on the medication. And it might allow you to get to something that it ends in you really not needing the medication at all. Um, I I know, for instance, that uh, sometimes there is the possibility, even with seemingly extreme mental health disorders, that medications provided uh, proper therapy sometimes can be stopped. I don't know how often that is, or how rare that is, or how specific that is. But I know I've had therapists talk about it, and like psychiatrists talk about the goal of medication isn't necessarily to keep you on it forever. It's to keep you on it so you can remain well enough to uh, access these other things that you desperately need. But you also desperately need. And so, yeah. In sum, what is interesting about the methadone promoters' critique is that they begin with a hypothesis that users are not subjects already there. They are not entities entering a setup with pre-given capacities. This hypothesis is very close to that in science studies, which hold that scientific phenomena do not exist before they pass through an experimental setup. The setup does not warp the phenomenon, instead, constraints, material and theoretical, are precisely what grant the phenomenon its very autonomy. The substitution promoters seek, I argued above, to influence drug users to become not exactly autonomous, but resistant. And they took even this capacity of a creature to resist and impose his own determinations to be emergent in the setting. The setting had to include methadone in order for users to have a chance. One can reread Glickman's history of rat cages and experiments on the sexual behavior of rats become capable of thinking that, in order for a creature to resist, constraints need not be eliminated but added and varied. From Glickman's account, it is clear that material elements of a setup might exclude or include resistance from the object of study, the female rat. At first, the female rat was performed as passive in a cage so small that she could not move and where the rat nail was dropped on top of her from above. But when the cage was made large enough to allow the rat to move, and when, for example, the slippery sides of the cage were replaced with wire mesh that it could grasp, the phenomenon of female rat sexuality was transformed in a way that the experimenters did not expect. It became possible to say that the female rat was, after all, active sexually. Substitution treatment becomes a forced invitation to the user's resistance, capable of speaking and acting on his/her own terms. I take methadone to be the wire mesh of addiction treatment, because it allows the object of study's resistance to be taken not as a disruption of the experiment, but as a phenomenon which might transform the experimenter and his/her initial questions. Yeah, you walked in when we were literally talking about female rat sexuality. We're talking about Glickman. I think this actually appears in whatever Fausto Sterling book people were reading. Is it Sexing the Body? I think that's what it is. Yeah. In the following sections, I try to show that methadone does not preclude recalcitrance, but rather that different techniques, constraints, are deployed around and by the user in order to tentatively let him/her act in non-classical ways. I describe the goal of treatment stabilization as a form of resistance. And second, I analyze a scene in which a user and staff members discuss how to use methadone, obey, or resist. I think so. I don't know. Are you speaking French? I can't tell. No. Maybe. I don't understand. Don't ask me how things work. Uh, but yeah, I don't know if I have much to say about this section. I feel like this section is like one of the things where it's like, yep, it speaks for itself. This is like a really fucking thing. It's like obviously, yep, you need to uh 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 yeah, I just didn't know what word to say. I was gonna say something, but then I was like, I don't even know if it's like necessary. But yeah. Stabilizing resistance, resisting stabilization. The eulogy of practice. The Blue Clinic staff described the goal of treatment as stabilization. This term, recurrent in pharmacological treatments, is precisely the kind of word that could lead one to fear that all that is attempted in the clinic is taming of drug users by deterministic drug, and the production of their resistance. Let us look at how the term was first used and how this use evolved through practice. The notion of stabilization was used at the start to describe the action of methadone in reference to pharmacological texts. The text argued that heroin use provoked extreme highs and lows, intense pleasure followed by sharp pain. This alternation between extremes characterized heroin addiction, pleasure followed by withdrawal. Stabilization with methadone was graphically represented by a smooth curve, which contrasted with the first irregular curve. In practice, the Blue Clinic these graphs of the respective effects of heroin and methadone were used again and again to illustrate stabilization to the novice patient to interest him/her in treatment. The graphs were drawn on bits of paper or traced in midair, a nurse explained. When we speak about products, drugs, with them, at the beginning they said to us that There'll be conflicts between us around the substitution medication. But I said, no, what is it that you want? And they answered, to feel good. So I drew a picture to show the feeling good of heroin and the feeling good of methadone. Methadone, it's a comfort just above normal. It doesn't have the peaks of pleasure nor the lows of withdrawal yet. It's something opiate. So they say, yes, that's what I want. Yeah, kind of. Uh, um, uh, Also, not just that, because with the rat case, it's kind of worse. It's actually kind of a bit worse and more illustrative. Um, they kept the female rats in a small cage where they literally couldn't move around, and dropped the male rat on top of the female rat. So the male rat was already on top of the female rat. I don't know how stuff goes, but and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't know anything about rat sex, so don't at me. But but it the female rat literally couldn't run away. Like it like was a literal impossibility at that point. And 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 kind of the same with drug addiction. Uh, Drug addiction. I'm sorry. Kind of the same with drug addiction. Substitution treatment allows the users to act in a way that wasn't possible before the substitution treatment. Um, because methadone is an opiate, but it's not heroin. That's actually really important. It actually isn't heroin, and it's actually not like heroin. In entirely. There's a difference to it. In some way, that actually allows it. It's not the same substance. It's not the same opiate. It doesn't have the same effects. Methadone at these times eliminated withdrawal and simultaneously eliminated the obligation to find heroin at all costs. With methadone, they are comfortable. In a straightforward sense, then, the user acquires new competencies because when causally acting drug methadone makes unnecessary the search for another heroin. What is original here is that these determinisms are precisely what opens up new possibilities for the user. Methadone is productive of interesting capacities if and when it is a determinism. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was yeah. Yeah. She said what I said. She said what I said, but a different way. Methadone stabilization, and she's about to say exactly more of what I said. What I said. Methadone stabilization opens up new possibilities for users because soothing was not a stunting of the user, but on the contrary, an extraordinary gift. Comfort was valued in discussions between users and staff because it contrasted with the previous conditions of life of the user without methadone and pursued by repressive measures. Comfort contrasts with the harmfulness of the French law concerning drug users, the law of 1970. Let's see. Brené de Sailly. Did I get that right? Did I get close? Methadone tentatively performed a user who would be less vulnerable in a society which penalized Bernard. Okay. Uh, would be less vulnerable in a society which penalized opiate use. But stabilization contains within itself more than a pharmacological definition and stands by care professionals against penalization. It is also a reference to the several general practitioners, GPs, who, acting outside the law, prescribed opiates such as uh, temgesic and morphine sulfates to users in the late 1980s and early 1990s. At first, they did so secretly, but after several years, they publicized their actions and were active in trying to mobilize politicians and administrators around the drug users' cause. These actors are brought before courts of justice and professional disciplinary bodies where they were sanctioned. The Narcotics Commission, Commission des, uh, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not going to even try. Stupéfiants? Fions? I don't know, something like that. The Narcotics Commission circulated newsletters which prohibited prescription and instituted protocols that made it more difficult to carry on with these uncontrolled practices. Yet many of these GPs persisted in prescribing and continued to develop a specific technique of prescription. In contrast with the few psychiatrists in Paris who until then had prescribed methadone at low doses, around 30 milligrams, to a maximum of 25 patients, these GPs described the necessity for large-scale prescription and for higher doses, around 80 milligrams, which allowed for opiate-induced pleasure. Inspired by these practices, the Blue Clinic staff offer an average dose between 60 and 100 milligrams a day. With this much, the user, he feels really good. There's observation, May 1995. The stabilization, when it is introduced as feeling good, draws on a series of rhetorics and techniques of interaction between GPs and users developed and advertised in the early 1990s. When stabilization is defined as well-being, as the nurse said it was above, staff allow an equivalence to be set up between heroin and substitution products, the very terms established by the users. At that moment, substitution is careful to interest the user in a way that she/he might speak in his own terms. In sum, at the beginning of practice, methadone stabilizes. It's a determinism, but one which refers to and mobilizes users and their allies on their own terms. Literally, instead of um, earlier, I don't think that this was in the sections we read, but it might have been. I'm a little bit loopy and out of it, so I might have forgot. But in the previous sections, it specifically said that the substitution promoters didn't want the patient to go through the doctor. They wanted them to go through the user, and that's what they're doing here. Substitution allows you to feel good in a safe setting where you can quit. Um, um, and it allows you to uh, maintain something where you can potentially, uh, do a lot better. After a year of practice, the action of the drug alone was deemed to be insufficient for the stabilization of the users. The succession of stabilization was no longer attributed to a single actor, but to a progressively longer list of actants. The action stabilization was not attributed to a single deterministic source, but to a collective. Not just methadone, but the architecture of the clinic, the trajectories of the clients within the house, the arrangement of the distribution locale, etc. All these elements were designated as playing a role in the stabilization of the user. Moreover, the list of substitution products used at the clinic was lengthened to include substances other than methadone. In 1995 yearly report, AC described the problems that emerged when 120 users came to request treatment at the clinic when only 50 places on the methadone program were available. The substitution promoters were faced with the possibility that they, just like the specialists, were excluding certain users from care if they did not prescribe substitution products other than methadone. To avoid this exclusion, the staff decided to expand their toolkit. They prescribed, in addition, Temgesic, Muscadin, Skenen, and more rarely, Halthium and Talvic. How were these products prescribed? The different substitution products were not interchangeable. Uh, uh, Also, sorry, I just want to. This isn't going to be adding much, but I want to point this out. Um, Progressively, you can see um, what the substitution promoters are doing. Um, they see a problem with something, um, and they're like, "Oh fuck, we have to do something. We like literally have to do something. We have to do something different." At first, it was they were specialists, and they were like, "Here, have some of this." Um, and Under the table because they realized that the previous way that they had been doing things wasn't working. And then they became substitution promoters, and they end up talking to the addict uh, uh, in kind of their own terms. Well, you're gonna have some trouble with me. The addict says, and it's like, well, actually, no. It's like, what do you want? You want to feel good? Well, we can actually do that. We can actually help you feel good while also helping you get off this drug. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and now as we can see, they're realizing, well, there's actually kind of a flaw. Um, we can't prescribe methadone to everybody, but we have these other options. Temgesic, I think, is the thing. They just said, I think that. Well, let me check. Mm, yeah. Uh, you know, they were like, well, we can't just prescribe methadone. We need to provide something else as well because we can't prescribe for whatever reason. We can't prescribe methadone to everybody. So they used Temgesic and something that they were. Some of these people were probably already using previously. The people at the Blue Clinic, the doctors there might have already used previously when they were prescribing it to patients under the counter. Or they might have known doctors who did this and had some success. And so they use this and probably also whatever other drugs that they did. Well, it works. Um, but yeah, how were these products prescribed? The different substitution products were not interchangeable. They are options on a pallet more or less well situated to specific users. Users were distinguished according to the stage they were at in their drug careers and their modes of drug use. Each drug afforded each drug afforded specific changes as well as continuities in the drug user's mode of drug use. They constituted for users tentative prohibitions or permissions to use in a certain way. Temgesic, which could be unofficially crushed and injected, was deemed more suitable for young users who still liked the high of heroin, were still injecting, and were far from wanting to quit drugs. Without providing them with the intense pleasure of heroin, Temgesic would still allow them the pleasure of shooting up. And because it eliminated opiate withdrawal symptoms, constituted a sort of reserve for days when they could not find heroin. It could make their overall drug use less risky. In contrast, methadone were reserved for those users who were really tired of drug use and who might benefit from the numerous constraints of the methadone protocol. The two products are contrasted in a table from a textbook manual drawn up by methadone promoters after several years of practice. And we can look at that, Estelle. Enhance. There we go. So you have on one side, we have Temgesic and we have methadone. Um, the retention and treatment for methadone is 80%, while with Temgesic, it's around 15 to 40%. Uh, the effects of methadone are rapid within an hour. Um, I assume they start within an hour. They last longer, about 24 hours. Morphine-like effects perceived. No antagonistic actions. Um, effects of Temgesic. Uh, it's slower. I don't know what the slower means. More brief. It might be referring to something that I'm not understanding. It induces a normal state and antagonizes opiates. Uh, it I forget which one is which, but one of the effects, yeah, one of the effects Pippa of Temgesic is I don't think you can take Temgesic. Uh, I don't think you can take Temgesic uh, while you're actively using opiates, or it might be the reverse. Sorry, it might be the reverse. I think she explains it, but yeah, I think it might be reverse. One of them, um, you're actually at I think a higher risk of overdose if you take it with other opiates, and and the other one again I forget which one. Um, you aren't. Hold on, let me actually. You can actually probably just go to the to footnote 18. An antagonist effect might be defined as follows. When a user on Temgesic uses heroin, the combination of an opiate with an antagonist, Temgesic, is that the user will go through withdrawal. An agonistic effect is when the drug simply adds with a said drug to heroin's effect. Methadone does not cause withdrawal if the patient uses heroin on top of it. Yeah. All right. Scroll up. Yeah. It does. I misunderstood. perhaps the most striking feature. Perhaps the most striking feature of this comparison was precisely that it was a comparison. Drugs were alternatives. They were the possibility to negotiate, to adjust, and to slightly change. Substances were not fixed, deterministic fatalities. They were described as a subtle array of constraints that might be used in modulating a relation between a drug, a user, and a practitioner. Stabilization was no longer simply a smooth curve summed up by the flat gesture of a hand in the air. With this table, stabilization is implicitly defined as the very capacity to alter, to transform slightly the mode of the use of the user by inserting into his own daily habits other routines, skills, or disciplines with the hope, the end of making a small difference in his mode of use and way of life. The array of substitution products themselves, described as a detailed list of constraints, illustrate the emergence of an alternative theory of action for humans. It becomes possible to say that they act when they are under the influence of a very specific type of constraint, which needs to be carefully chosen, tried out, perhaps adjusted until the right one is finally hit upon. The stabilized user is constrained, but he is constrained with very particular determinisms. So I'm going to speak in his own terms. The particular constraints was especially visible during an interaction between AC, Nurse Charlene, and Martin, a user. I insist here upon the activity of the user in order to show that this constraint, methadone, does not act without Linzu. I don't know. AC is one of the doctors. Without the user, but on the contrary requires and encourages him/her to resist. That is, to act in turn. I will show that the human user activity emerges when she/he uses methadone, and vice versa. The activity of methadone emerges as it is put into relation with specific techniques of use by the patient and by the clinic staff. Stabilization is a return gift to the patient who knows how to resist. In contrast to specialist hypotheses, the drug and the user do not detract from each other's strength. Instead, they potentialize each other. Hold on. I want to see something. Okay, I really don't want to stop, but I don't think I can read anymore because like I'm back to I feel really exhausted. But uh but we will be able to finish this next time because it's only 7 pages. But I think we will stop for tonight just because I'm really tired. I was actually late to stream, and there was a reason for that. And because of that reason, I'm a little bit exhausted mentally. Also, I've been reading all day. Basically, I've been reading a lot, so there's also that. It probably doesn't help. Um, but yeah. Before we go, does anyone have any questions? Don't end stream yet. Please don't end stream yet. Uh, uh, but uh, but yeah. Um, uh, while I'm waiting for everybody to ask questions, hold on. I'm doing something. That's what I'm doing. while I'm waiting for everyone to ask questions, anyone who isn't already in my Discord, if you want to ask me questions, please join. Anyone who's here, I forgot to announce this at the beginning of stream because I got so distracted. But also anyone who wishes to, anyone who wants. I also wrote an essay recently, and if you want to join my Discord to talk to me about the essay I wrote, or anything like that, or comment on me, or just make suggestions to me for anything, you can do that there, or also you can do that on the. I just made it a free post on Patreon because that seemed like the easiest. Um, and so yeah, and so yeah. Uh, but if no one has any questions, we can end stream. Uh, but yeah, please join my Discord though. I love you all. Please join my Discord. It'll get more active, I promise. All right, we'll give the people 1 to 2 more. Don't let me typing out a long message. I feel like I give enough time. Give enough time. If they really want to type something out to me, they can just do it on my Discord. Oh my god, I can hear myself. I'm gonna cry. I just like heard my own voice. All right. You will have 1 more minute to ask a question, and then the stream will be over. You'll have 1 more minute. And after that minute is up, you're all kaput. And then the next stream, I will stress them. It's important. Stress is good for you. Stress is a positive constraint. That's what we're learning about. All right, everyone. You had your time. You had your time to ask your questions, to say the things you wanted to say. Now it's over for you. The stream will be killed. Kill the stream, Estelle. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's dead now.